Welcome to Waste Management Training. Presented by Bonneville Labs. The purpose of this Waste Management Plan training is to outline the requirements for the management and disposal of wastes generated that must be followed in accordance with the Federal Resource Conservation and Recovery Act. There are several objectives of Waste Management Plan training, including regulatory overview, the classification of hazardous waste, management of hazardous waste, transportation of hazardous waste, and disposal of hazardous waste. The United States Environmental Protection Agency, US EPA, is a federal agency that is responsible for protecting human health and the environment. The US EPA writes and enforces environmental regulations that are designed to protect the environment and the people who live in it. These regulations are enforced by regional offices across the country. In California, the California Department of Toxic Substances Control, DTSC, is responsible for protecting people and the environment from the harmful effects of toxic substances. The DTSC enforces hazardous waste regulations and inspects permitted facilities and hazardous waste generators to ensure compliance. If necessary, the DTSC may take enforcement actions to ensure that these regulations are followed. Both the US EPA and the DTSC play important roles in protecting human health and the environment from the harmful effects of toxic substances and other environmental hazards. The Certified Unified Program Agency, CUPA, is an agency that is responsible for consolidating, coordinating, and making consistent portions of 6 existing programs in California. These programs include hazardous waste generators. This program regulates the generation, transportation, and management of hazardous waste in California. Underground storage tanks, USTs. This program regulates the installation, operation, and closure of underground storage tanks that contain hazardous substances. Hazardous materials business plans, HMBPs. This program requires businesses that handle hazardous materials to develop and implement plans to prevent accidents and releases of hazardous materials. California Accidental Release Prevention Program, CalARP. This program requires businesses that handle hazardous materials to develop and implement plans to prevent and respond to accidental releases of hazardous materials. Above-ground storage tanks, SPCC plans. This program regulates the installation and operation of above-ground storage tanks that contain hazardous substances. California Fire Code. This program sets standards for the design, construction, and operation of buildings and other structures to ensure that they are safe from fire and other hazards. The CUPA is responsible for enforcing these programs and ensuring that businesses in California are in compliance with the relevant regulations. This helps to protect the health and safety of the public and the environment. A hazardous waste determination is the process of determining whether a waste is hazardous or not. According to federal and state regulations, a person who generates a waste must determine if it is hazardous by determining if the waste is excluded from regulation, is listed as a hazardous waste, exhibits any hazardous waste characteristics. There are several ways to make a hazardous waste determination. One way is to test the waste to see if it meets the criteria for a hazardous waste. Another way is to use the generator's knowledge about the waste and its characteristics to make a determination. It is important to correctly determine whether a waste is hazardous or not, as this will determine how the waste must be managed and disposed of. Failure to properly determine hazardous waste can result in fines and other penalties. The Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, has identified 4 characteristics that can be used to determine whether a waste is hazardous or not. These characteristics are: ignitability. A waste is considered ignitable if it is flammable. Corrosivity. A waste is considered corrosive if it is capable of corroding metal or other materials. Reactivity. A waste is considered reactive if it is explosive, unstable, or capable of generating dangerous gases. Toxicity. A waste is considered toxic if it contains chemicals that are poisonous or can cause harmful effects to human health or the environment when released into the air, water, or soil. If a waste exhibits any of these characteristics, it may be considered hazardous and subject to specific regulations for its management and disposal. Ignitable wastes are wastes that are flammable or have a flash point of less than 140 degrees Fahrenheit. Examples of ignitable wastes include isooctane, acetone, isopropanol, alcohol, oxidizers, flammable compressed gases, non-empty aerosol containers. It is important to properly manage and dispose of ignitable wastes, as they can pose a fire hazard if not handled properly. Ignitable wastes are subject to specific regulations for their storage, transport, and disposal to ensure the safety of workers and the public. Corrosive wastes are wastes that are capable of corroding metal or other materials. Corrosive wastes may have a pH of less than or equal to 2 or a pH of greater than or equal to 12.5. Examples of corrosive wastes include cleaning chemicals, neutralizing chemicals, sulfuric acid, phosphoric acid, sodium hydroxide, calcium hydroxide. It is important to properly manage and dispose of corrosive wastes, as they can pose a risk of injury to workers and the public if not handled properly. Corrosive wastes are subject to specific regulations for their storage, transport, and disposal to ensure the safety of workers and the public. Reactive wastes are wastes that are unstable and may explode under certain conditions, such as with the application of heat, friction, or pressure. Examples of reactive wastes include air or water reactive chemicals, explosives. It is important to properly manage and dispose of reactive wastes, as they can pose a risk of explosion or other dangerous incidents if not handled properly. Toxic wastes are wastes that contain chemicals that are poisonous or can cause harmful effects to human health or the environment when released into the air, water, or soil. Examples of toxic wastes include used oil, methylene blue, gram staining waste. It is important to properly manage and dispose of toxic wastes, as they can pose a risk to human health and the environment if not handled properly. Toxic wastes can be harmful when ingested or absorbed, and they can contaminate groundwater and other natural resources. Listed hazardous wastes are hazardous wastes that have been identified by the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, as being particularly hazardous. These wastes are listed in the EPA's regulations and are subject to specific requirements for their management and disposal. There are two main categories of listed hazardous wastes: commercial chemical products, CCP, and EPA-listed solvents, F-listed. Commercial chemical products, CCP, are hazardous wastes that are generated from the production, use, or disposal of commercial chemical products. An example of a CCP hazardous waste is acetone. EPA-listed solvents, F-listed, are hazardous wastes that are solvents that are listed by the EPA as being particularly hazardous. These solvents are known as F-listed wastes. In addition to these categories, there is a subcategory of hazardous wastes known as acutely hazardous wastes, which are highly toxic and pose a significant risk to human health and the environment. Hazardous waste generators are classified into three categories based on the amount of hazardous waste they generate in a calendar month. Large quantity generator, LQG, a hazardous waste generator that generates more than 1,000 kilograms, 2,205 pounds, of hazardous waste or more than 1 kilogram, 2.2 pounds, of acute hazardous waste in a calendar month. Small quantity generator, SQG, a hazardous waste generator that generates between 101,000 kilograms, 220.5 and 2,205 pounds, of hazardous waste or between 101 kilogram, 220.5 and 2.2 pounds, of acute hazardous waste in a calendar month. Very small quantity generator, VSQG, a hazardous waste generator that generates less than 100 kilograms, 220.5 pounds, of hazardous waste and less than 1 kilogram, 2.2 pounds, of acute hazardous waste in a calendar month. Hazardous waste generators are allowed a certain amount of time to accumulate hazardous waste on site before they are required to properly manage and dispose of it. This is known as the hazardous waste accumulation time. The hazardous waste accumulation time varies based on the category of hazardous waste generator that a business falls into. Large quantity generator, LQG and LQG is allowed to accumulate hazardous waste on site for up to 90 days. Small quantity generator, SQG and SQG is allowed to accumulate hazardous waste on site for up to 180 days. Very small quantity generator, VSQG of VSQG is allowed to accumulate hazardous waste on site for up to 90 days, but only if the VSQG meets certain conditions, such as having a written hazardous waste management plan in place. Hazardous waste generators are allowed a certain amount of time to accumulate hazardous waste on site before they are required to properly manage and dispose of it. A hazardous waste inspection is a process that is used to ensure that hazardous wastes are properly managed and stored on site. During a hazardous waste inspection, it is important to check the following: that containers are labeled with a complete hazardous waste label, that the container label identifies the contents, that the container label has an accumulation start date, that containers are kept closed, that containers are not corroded, that containers are maintained to minimize the possibility of a release, example, by using secondary containment. It is recommended to inspect hazardous waste containers at least once a week to ensure compliance with the relevant regulations. If any deficiencies are identified during an inspection, it is important to correct them as soon as possible. If you need assistance, you can contact your safety officer for help. Hazardous waste container labels play a critical role in the proper management and disposal of hazardous wastes. According to federal and state regulations, hazardous waste container labels must be legible, visible, and marked with the following information: hazardous waste, the generator's name and address, the contents of the container, the physical state of the contents, example liquid, solid, the hazardous properties of the contents, example flammability, reactivity, the accumulation start date, i.e., the date that the hazardous waste was first placed in the container. It is important to ensure that hazardous waste container labels are complete and accurate, as this helps to ensure the safe and proper management and disposal of hazardous wastes. Segregation of chemicals is the practice of separating different types of chemicals from each other to prevent accidental reactions or other hazards. It is important to store chemicals in a way that ensures that incompatible chemicals are not placed next to each other. Some examples of chemical incompatibilities to consider when segregation chemicals include flammables and oxidizers, flammables and any ignition source, strong acids and strong alkalis, concentrated acids and water, organic solvents and corrosives, corrosives and other reactive materials. By properly segregating chemicals, it is possible to reduce the risk of accidents and injuries in the workplace. It is important to follow proper chemical segregation practices to ensure the safety of workers and the public. Proper disposal of hazardous waste is essential to protect human health and the environment. According to federal and state regulations, hazardous waste may not be dumped down the storm drain, discharged to the sanitary sewer, discarded with the garbage, allowed to evaporate into the atmosphere. Instead, hazardous waste must be properly managed and disposed of through an approved hazardous waste disposal facility. It is important to follow proper hazardous waste disposal procedures to ensure compliance with the relevant regulations and to prevent harm to human health and the environment. In California, there are specific regulations that apply to the management and disposal of empty hazardous waste containers. It is important to follow these regulations to ensure compliance and to protect human health and the environment. One important requirement to be aware of is that the venting of chemicals in a chemical fume hood is not allowed. Fume hoods are designed to provide ventilation and protect workers from exposure to hazardous chemicals. However, they are not intended to be used as a method of disposing of hazardous wastes. Instead, hazardous wastes must be properly managed and disposed of through an approved hazardous waste disposal facility. By following proper procedures for the management and disposal of empty hazardous waste containers, it is possible to ensure the safety of workers and the public, and to protect the environment. The disposal of empty hazardous waste containers depends on the size of the container and the type of waste it previously contained. Generally, the following guidelines apply. Containers that are 5 gallons or less in size. If the container is made of glass and is not broken, it can be recycled. If the container is not made of glass or is broken, it should be disposed of in a landfill. Containers that are greater than 5 gallons in size. If the container is completely emptied of both pourable and non-pourable contents, it can be disposed of in the trash. Before disposing of an empty hazardous waste container, it is important to ensure that the container is completely empty of all contents and that the original label has been removed or extinguished. This helps to ensure that the container does not pose a risk to human health or the environment. There are specific guidelines that must be followed when disposing of hazardous chemical waste, depending on the type of waste being generated. One type of hazardous chemical waste is liquid chemical waste, which includes spent solvents, example IPA, acetone, ethanol, liquids generated by instruments, example ISCO, HPLC, LC/MS, and acids/bases, example sulfuric acid, ammonium hydroxide. When disposing of liquid chemical waste, it is important to follow these guidelines. Collect the waste in a 5-gallon carboy. Store the carboy in secondary containment to prevent spills or leaks. Do not overfill the carboy. Allow for expansion and safe transportation by leaving a 10% headspace. Empty liquids from vials and place the empty vials in the solid hazardous waste container. Do not combine organic solvents with toxic metal waste, such as arsenic, barium, cadmium, chromium, lead, mercury, selenium, silver, copper, nickel, and zinc. Solid chemical hazardous waste is a type of hazardous waste that is generated when chemicals become contaminated with other substances or materials. Examples of solid chemical hazardous waste include chemically contaminated items such as wipes, pipettes, test tubes, gloves, filters, and other debris. When disposing of solid chemical hazardous waste, it is important to follow these guidelines. Do not include any free-flowing liquids in the solid hazardous waste container. Whenever possible, dispose of solid reagent chemicals in the manufacturer's container. Empty liquid from vials or collect vials with free-flowing liquids in a Ziploc bag, then place the sealed bag in a separate container, such as a 5-gallon bucket or a 30-gallon poly or metal drum. Solid biohazardous waste is a type of hazardous waste that is generated from biological materials that have the potential to pose a risk to human health or the environment. Examples of solid biohazardous waste include used laboratory gloves, sharps, and other materials that have come into contact with biological agents. Proper management and disposal of solid biohazardous waste is essential to protect human health and the environment. To properly manage solid biohazardous waste, it is important to follow these guidelines. Place the waste in a red bin with a red biohazard bag marked with a biohazard symbol. The container may be any color, but it must be leak-resistant, have tight-fitting covers, be kept clean and in good repair, and be solid/rigid. The container must be labeled biohazardous waste or have the International Biohazard symbol and the word biohazard on the lid and sides so it is visible from any lateral direction. Examples of liquid biohazardous waste include laboratory cultures, media, and other materials that have come into contact with biological agents. Proper management and disposal of liquid biohazardous waste is essential to protect human health and the environment. To properly manage liquid biohazardous waste, it is important to follow these guidelines. Treat the waste with a 10% bleach solution at a concentration of 1 to 10 by volume. Allow the waste to sit in contact with the bleach solution for 25 minutes before disposing of it down a laboratory sink. Note: liquid biohazardous waste containing hazardous chemicals should be disposed of as a chemical waste and never treated with bleach. Sharps are objects that are used in the laboratory setting have the potential to puncture or cut skin, such as needles, scalpels, and glass pipettes. Proper management and disposal of sharps is essential to protect human health and the environment. To properly manage sharps, it is important to follow these guidelines. Place sharps in a US FDA-approved sharps container. Tape closed or tightly lid full sharps containers ready for disposal to prevent the loss of contents. Store sharps containers ready for disposal for no more than 30 days. Label sharps containers with the words sharps waste or with the International Biohazard symbol and the word biohazard. Examples of broken laboratory glassware include broken flasks, beakers, bottles, ampoules, test tubes, vials, plates, and watch glasses. To properly manage broken laboratory glassware, it is important to follow these guidelines. Do not include any free-flowing liquids or hazardous waste solids in the glass disposal boxes. Ensure that the following items are not placed in glass disposal boxes: thermometers, any containers with liquids or residues, i.e., contaminated with chemical, biological, or radioactive material, syringes, any type of listed sharps, example needles, razor blades, scalpels, etc., light bulbs, batteries, and other universal waste items. Universal waste is a type of hazardous waste that is generated from certain hazardous materials that are widely produced and widely discarded. Examples of universal waste include fluorescent and high-intensity discharge lamps, neon, mercury vapor, high-pressure sodium, LED, and metal halide lamps, batteries, and mercury thermostats and mercury thermometers. The Universal Waste Rule allows certain hazardous wastes to be managed under streamlined requirements that encourage the collection, recycling, or disposal of these wastes. Proper labeling and container use is essential to ensure the safe management and disposal of universal waste. To properly manage and dispose of universal waste, it is important to follow these guidelines. Label universal waste containers with the word universal waste or with the universal waste symbol, a black circle with an X through it. Use containers that are designed to store and transport universal waste. These containers should be leak-resistant, have tight-fitting covers, and be kept clean and in good repair. Do not mix different types of universal waste in the same container. Do not mix universal waste with other types of hazardous waste. By following these guidelines, it is possible to safely manage and dispose of universal waste and ensure compliance with the relevant regulations. Proper profiling, transportation, and disposal of hazardous waste is essential to protect human health and the environment. To properly manage hazardous waste, it is important to follow these guidelines. Have the hazardous waste profiled for disposal by a qualified individual. Transport the hazardous waste using a registered hazardous waste transporter and a uniform hazardous waste manifest. Deliver the hazardous waste to a permitted facility. Note: RCRA hazardous wastes are subject to DOT regulations. It is important to report work-related injuries, illnesses, incidents, and near misses promptly in order to ensure that appropriate measures can be taken to prevent similar incidents from occurring in the future. To report these incidents, follow these guidelines. Immediately report any work-related injuries, illnesses, incidents, and near misses to your safety officer and manager. This includes incidents that occur off-site or on company-related travel. The safety officer should notify the operations team of the name of the affected employees and the nature of the injury. The manager and safety officer should complete an incident report for any injuries, illnesses, incidents, and near misses that are related to job activity within 24 hours and submit it to the site manager and operations team. By following these guidelines, it is possible to ensure that work-related injuries, illnesses, incidents, and near misses are properly reported and addressed. Thank you for taking this training. To complete the training and ensure you receive credit, please complete the quiz.